The healer's heart. The first time I saw him, he was dying. Blood seeped between my fingers as I pressed herbs against the gash in his side, my heart racing as I felt his life force ebbing. The stranger had collapsed at the edge of my garden just as dusk painted the sky in violet hues, his armor dented, and his sword still clutched in his trembling hand. 3 arrows protruded from gaps in his metal plates, and a deep sword wound crossed his ribs. I knew what I had to do, though it might reveal everything I'd fought so hard to hide. The village already whispered about my unusual success rate with difficult cases. One more unexplainable healing might be all it took to transform whispers into accusations. But I couldn't let him die. Something about him called to me, even in his unconscious state. Perhaps the peace in his face despite his grievous wounds, or the way his hand had reached for mine as I knelt beside him. "Hold on," I whispered, placing one hand over his heart. The earth's energy surged through me like liquid moonlight, flowing from the soil beneath my knees, through my body, and into his wounds. Soft green light illuminated his face, strong features, dark hair, and eyes that suddenly flew open to meet mine. Those eyes. In that moment, I knew my life would never be the same. My name is Elizabeth Graythorn, and I am a healer. What the villagers don't know is that my gift comes from something deeper than herb lore and poultices. The magic runs in my blood, as ancient as the forest itself. My grandmother called it the old way, the art of channeling the earth's own healing energy through human hands. The stranger, I would later learn his name was Jeffrey Alden, survived that night, though healing him had drained me more than I'd expected. The multiple wounds and their severity had required more power than I'd ever channeled before. When he finally woke 3 days later in my cottage, the questions I dreaded never came. Instead, he simply watched me with those intense eyes as I changed his bandages, his calloused hand catching mine. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough but warm. "I've never seen healing like yours." I pulled away, busying myself with my herbs. "Rest. You're still weak." "I've rested 3 days, or so you tell me." Jeffrey tried to sit up, wincing. "I think that's enough time to at least learn the name of my savior." Despite my reservations, I found myself smiling. Elizabeth, he repeated, as if tasting the word. "I am Jeffrey Alden, once a knight of the Western Realm. Now," he gestured to his battered armor in the corner, "now just a wanderer, it seems." "What brought you to our woods in such a state?" I asked, unable to contain my curiosity. His expression darkened. "Bandits, but not ordinary ones. They knew who I was, knew I was coming. Someone wanted me dead." That explained the quality of his wounds. Not random battle injuries, but calculated strikes meant to kill. Who would want that? "The list is longer than I'd like," he admitted. "I've made enemies serving various nobles, speaking against corruption when I should have stayed silent. The latest was Lord Edmund Blake. I discovered he was taxing his people into starvation while claiming raiders had stolen the grain. When I gathered evidence and threatened to expose him to the king's justice, he stripped me of my position. I fled, but his men have been hunting me since." The name sent a chill through me. Lord Blake's lands weren't far from our village, just 3 days' ride to the west. His men might still be searching. "You're safe here," I said firmly. "Our village is small, easily overlooked, and few venture into these woods without good reason." Over the next few weeks, as Jeffrey recovered, I discovered that having someone else in my small cottage changed everything. The spaces that had felt comfortable in its solitude now hummed with his presence. He insisted on helping despite his injury, chopping herbs, organizing my shelves, even attempting to cook, with disastrous results that left us both laughing. At night, when the cottage grew quiet save for the crackle of the hearth, we talked. He told me of battles fought and kingdoms served, of disillusionment with lords who cared more for power than people. I spoke of my childhood, learning healing from my grandmother, though I carefully avoided mentioning the magic that had passed down with that knowledge. "Your grandmother," he said one evening. "She must have been remarkable. The villagers speak of her still." I nodded, feeling the familiar ache of loss. She was everything to me after my parents died. She taught me not just about herbs and healing, but about responsibility, about using one's gifts to help others. "She would be proud of you." Jeffrey's hand found mine in the firelight. "I see how the villagers depend on you, even if some of them fear what they don't understand." My heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "You're different here," he continued. "The villagers, when they come for healing, they respect you, but there's fear in their eyes. They don't see you as I do." My hands stilled in their work of grinding herbs. "And how do you see me?" Jeffrey moved closer, his fingers brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I see someone who carries light within her. Someone who could have left me to die, but chose to risk everything to save a stranger. Someone whose power comes from compassion, not ambition." "You don't know what you're saying." I stood, my heart pounding. "You don't know what I am." "I know enough." He rose too, and despite my protests, pulled me into his arms. "I know that whatever power flows through you, it comes from love, from a desire to heal, to protect. How could that be wrong?" The church speaks of many things," he interrupted gently. "But I've seen too much of the world to believe that all magic is evil. Your gift heals. It saves lives. That's all I need to know." I wanted to believe him. More than anything, I wanted to trust that someone could know all of me and not turn away. But fear had been my companion for too long. That night, alone in my bed, I heard the whispers of the earth growing stronger. Something was stirring in the ancient woods, something that made the protective runes around my cottage pulse with warning. The magic itself felt different. Darker. Hungry. I knew then that my peaceful life was about to change, one way or another. The next morning, as I walked to the village for supplies, the whispers followed me. Literally this time, Mrs. Eldridge and her daughter, huddled with the baker's wife, falling silent as I passed. Their eyes held more suspicion than usual, and I knew why when I reached the marketplace. Thomas Blackwood, the merchant's son who had once sought my hand in marriage, stood holding court among a group of villagers. His voice carried clearly, "Unnatural, that's what it is. Green light in the night, they say. My own cousin saw it. And now she harbors this stranger, this knight, who appeared from nowhere." I hurried home, my basket only half filled. Jeffrey was in the garden when I returned, shirtless as he split wood for the fire. The sight of him, so strong now, so different from the dying man I'd found, made my heart ache. He saw my face and immediately dropped the axe. "What's wrong?" "They know," I whispered. "Or they suspect. Thomas Blackwood is stirring up the old fears." Jeffrey's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. I won't let them harm you." "You don't understand. The magic, it's getting stronger. Something's coming. Something that's making the earth itself restless and using my power." I hesitated. "Each time it takes more from me. That night I healed you. I've never been so drained. One day, it might take too much." He stepped closer, taking my hands in his. "Then let me help you carry this burden. Let me be your strength when you need it." "I can't ask that of you." "You're not asking. I'm offering." His hands moved to cup my face. "Elizabeth, From the moment I opened my eyes and saw you bathed in that green light, I knew my heart was yours. I've wandered so long, searching for purpose, for home. I've found both in you. The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable as sunrise. His lips were gentle but insistent, and I melted into him, allowing myself to believe, just for a moment, that love could be stronger than fear. That belief was tested sooner than we expected. That very night, the ancient force I'd sensed in the woods made itself known. I woke to the sound of screaming from the village and the sight of sickly purple flames rising above the trees. Jeffrey was already up, pulling on his armor. "Stay here," he ordered. "No." I grabbed my herb bag and the staff my grandmother had given me, a length of rowan wood carved with protective runes that helped focus healing energy. "Whatever this is, it's connected to the old magic. You'll need me." We found the village in chaos. Purple fire crawled along the ground like living things, but they weren't natural flames. They were manifestations of corrupt magic, burning not flesh but life force itself. Already, several villagers lay unconscious, their faces ashen. At the center of it all stood a figure in a black cloak, wielding magic that felt like a twisted reflection of my own. Thomas Blackwood lay at the figure's feet, barely conscious. "So," a feminine voice emerged from beneath the hood. "Another earthbound healer survives. I've been searching for you, sister." "I am not your sister," I said, feeling the earth's power rise within me. "What do you want?" "Want. I want what was stolen from us centuries ago. The right to practice our arts openly, to rule instead of heal, to take instead of give." The figure threw back her hood, revealing a face that might once have been beautiful, before bitterness carved its lines. "Join me, and we can show these villagers what real power looks like." With a shock, I recognized her from my grandmother's teachings. "Lady Blake," I breathed. "Edmund Blake's grandmother. You disappeared decades ago." "I went seeking true power," she corrected. "The old families. They taught us to heal, to serve, to bow and scrape before those who feared our gifts. But I found another way. The earth's power can take as well as give, can destroy as well as create." "That's not what magic is for," I said, raising my staff. The runes carved into it glowed with familiar green light. "It's a gift, not a weapon." She laughed. "Then you'll die with them. Your grandmother was just as foolish. She refused to join me, too, decades ago. I had hoped you might be wiser." The battle that followed would live forever in village legend, though few understood its true nature. As Jeffrey led the villagers to safety and fought off the corrupted shadows Lady Blake summoned, I faced her magic with my own. Green light clashed with purple, healing against destruction, giving against taking. I felt the earth respond to my call, channels of power opening wider than ever before. But she was right about one thing. Using so much magic was killing me. My vision darkened at the edges, my strength failing. Then I felt hands on my shoulders and Jeffrey's voice in my ear. "Take what you need." "I'm here." Something new flowed through our connection. Not the earth's power, but human strength freely given. Love, trust, and determination poured into me, and I understood suddenly what my grandmother had tried to tell me about the true source of healing magic. It wasn't just about channeling the earth's energy. It was about connecting, about the strength found in bonds between people. The green light blazed brighter than ever, not just from my staff, but from the ground itself. Roots burst from the earth, wrapping around Lady Blake as nature itself rejected her corrupted power. Her screams cut off as the earth reclaimed her, leaving only a scatter of purple embers that quickly faded to ash. I swayed on my feet, and Jeffrey caught me. Through blurring vision, I saw the villagers emerging from their homes, Thomas Blackwood among them. I waited for the fear, the accusations. Instead, Thomas dropped to his knees. "You saved us," he said simply. "All this time, we feared your power, and you used it to save us." One by one, others joined him. Mrs. Eldridge brought blankets. The baker's wife offered bread. And slowly, I realized that the very thing I'd feared, being seen for what I truly was, had set me free. Later that night, as Jeffrey and I sat in my garden under the stars, he asked, "What now?" I looked at our intertwined hands, still faintly glowing with shared power. Now we heal. The village, ourselves, the land itself. Together. Lady Blake's corruption will take time to cleanse from these woods. Together, he agreed, pulling me closer. My wandering days are done, Elizabeth Graythorne. Where you are is where I belong. What about Lord Blake? His men will still be hunting you. Jeffrey smiled. Let them come. After tonight, I think they'll find this village has unexpected protections. And perhaps it's time the king heard the truth about the Blake family's dealings. I kissed him then, under the light of the moon that had witnessed so much magic. But the greatest magic of all was this: two hearts becoming one, a love that could overcome darkness, and the simple truth that in finding one another, we had both found home. The earth hummed beneath us in approval, and for the first time in my life, I felt completely, utterly at peace. My power was no longer a secret to hide, but a gift to share, and in Jeffrey's arms, I finally understood that the greatest healing magic of all was love itself. As we sat there in the quiet of the garden, watching the stars wheel overhead, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Knight and healer, warrior and witch, two souls bound not by magic or duty, but by choice and love. And in the end, that was the only magic we needed. Frost and flame. The villagers called them the eternal mountains, the towering peaks that pierced the clouds like ancient spears of ice. From my vantage point in my steam-powered snowmobile, their jagged silhouettes cut against the pewter sky like a crown of crystal thorns. I called them my next great challenge, though the word challenge felt inadequate as I watched storm clouds gather around their peaks, dark and heavy with winter's fury. As my vehicle crawled up the narrow mountain path, the engine's steady purr competed with the howling wind. The instrument panel cast a warm glow of brass and copper light across my gloved hands, the metal surfaces polished to mirror brightness from years of use. Steam hissed through carefully calibrated valves, smelling of oil and metal and adventure. Beyond the reinforced glass windows, snowflakes danced in hypnotic patterns, each unique crystal catching the light before joining its brethren in the deepening drifts. I hadn't come to these remote heights for the legends, though the innkeeper in the last town had filled my ears with tales of the mysterious snow maiden who protected these peaks. I still remembered how her eyes had widened when I mentioned my destination, how her weathered hands had clutched at her shawl as she spoke of a being who walked through blizzards as easily as summer breezes, her presence turning even the deadliest storms into gentle snowfall. "She's saved us all, one way or another," the innkeeper had said, her voice dropping to a whisper heavy with reverence. "But never look directly at her, my boy. Her beauty freezes the heart as surely as the deepest winter." I had smiled politely, more focused on checking my equipment than heeding supernatural warnings. I sought inspiration from my next invention. Perhaps something to help humanity survive in these harsh climates. My workshop back in the city was filled with half-finished projects, each one reaching toward the same goal: bridging the gap between human fragility and nature's raw power. Yet, as the storm intensified and my visibility dropped to mere feet, those dismissed warnings began to echo in my mind. The wind's howl took on an almost musical quality, like a chorus of voices just beyond comprehension. The snow itself seemed to move with purpose, swirling in patterns too precise to be natural. The first sign of real trouble came with a sound like thunder, except thunder had no place in a snowstorm. I looked up through the glass dome of my vehicle to see a wall of white racing down the mountainside. The avalanche moved faster than any natural phenomenon should, as if driven by an intelligent malice. In the heart of the cascading snow, I could have sworn I saw a figure of darker white, like a shadow cast by winter itself. I gunned the engine, but the snow was already upon me. The world turned white, then black. Metal screamed as my vehicle was tossed like a child's toy. Glass cracked in crystalline spider webs across my vision. The last thing I remembered was a flash of silver-white hair and eyes that glowed like the heart of a glacier, filled with an ancient sorrow that called to something deep within my soul. When I woke, I lay in a cave of ice that sparkled with its own inner light. Layers of color shifted through the frozen walls, deep blues, subtle purples, hints of green, creating an aurora in miniature. My body should have been frozen, but warmth emanated from the very walls around me, as if the ice itself had been transformed into something that defied natural law. And there she stood, the figure from my fading memories, real as the cold air in my lungs, real and more breathtaking than any legend could have prepared me for. Her dress seemed woven from snowflakes, each movement creating cascades of crystalline light that played across the cave walls. Her skin held the pale luminescence of moonlight on fresh snow, translucent enough that I could almost see the gentle pulse of power beneath. Her hair floated around her face as if suspended in water, each strand catching and refracting light like strands of living crystal. But it was her eyes that captured me, blue as the deepest ice, ancient and lonely as winter itself. Within their depths, I saw centuries of solitude, of watching mortal lives flash by like summer flowers, while she remained unchanging as the eternal snows. In that moment, all my scientific certainties crumbled like frost beneath the sun. "You shouldn't have come here, Ren Nakamura," she said, her voice like wind through icicles, musical and sharp and haunting. "These mountains are not safe for dreamers." Frost spiraled across the cave floor where she stepped, creating intricate patterns that reminded me of the blueprints scattered across my workshop desk. I pushed myself up, wincing at my bruised muscles. The air around me sparkled with tiny ice crystals that caught the ethereal light, creating halos of rainbow color. "You know my name? I know all who enter my domain." She moved closer, and the air around her shimmered with frost that smelled of winter roses and pine needles. Her presence brought a chill that somehow felt intimate rather than threatening, like the first breath of winter through an open window. "Just as I know you don't believe in me. The Snow Maiden of legend." I couldn't keep the wonder from my voice. All my scientific certainties melted in her presence, replaced by a deeper kind of knowing. My fingers itched to reach for her, to prove her solidity despite her ethereal appearance. "But you're real. Real enough to save you." Her expression softened slightly, and the temperature in the cave rose a fraction. A strand of her crystalline hair drifted close enough to brush my cheek, leaving a trail of tingling warmth and cold that lingered like a caress. "But you must leave when the storm passes. There are forces stirring in these mountains that even I cannot protect you from." "What forces? What are you protecting these people from?" I took a step toward her, drawn by an impulse I couldn't explain. The air between us grew thick with tension, like the moment before lightning strikes. She turned away, her form becoming translucent at the edges. The scent of winter roses intensified, mixing with an ancient smell of ice and stone. "Some questions are better left in the snow, inventor. For now, rest. Dawn comes soon." Her voice carried notes of longing that belied her warning words. "Dreams are dangerous things in these mountains. They have a way of coming true. Before I could respond, she melted into the air like snow in sunlight, leaving only a lingering trace of her presence. A slight warmth in the usually bitter cold, a faint shimmer in the air, and the haunting sense of something vital left unfinished. When I woke again, I lay in a normal cave, my vehicle somehow intact beside me. Sunlight filtered through a thin sheet of ice across the entrance, creating rainbow patterns that danced across the stone walls. Only a lingering scent of winter roses suggested I hadn't dreamed the whole encounter. I should have listened. Should have descended the mountain and returned to my comfortable workshop in the city, where science made sense and magic was safely confined to children's stories. But her eyes haunted me. Not their supernatural glow, but the profound solitude I'd glimpsed within them. No one should carry such loneliness, not even a spirit of winter. The village of Blythewood welcomed me with surprised warmth that contrasted sharply with the biting mountain air. Smoke rose from stone chimneys in lazy spirals, carrying the scent of pine wood and cooking spices. Children played in the snow-covered streets, their laughter bright as silver bells, while adults went about their work with the unhurried confidence of those long adapted to winter's ways. Few outsiders brave the high passes, the village elder told me over steaming cups of pine needle tea. The liquid glowed amber in carved crystal cups that caught and reflected the firelight. Her wrinkled hands cupped her drink as she studied me with eyes wise as the mountains themselves. The snow maiden guides worthy travelers to us, they say. Perhaps she sees something in you. I didn't tell her about my encounter in the cave, but my silence seemed answer enough. She nodded as if confirming something to herself and pressed a small crystal into my palm. It felt warm despite its icy appearance, pulsing gently like a tiny heartbeat. For protection, she said simply, and perhaps for connection. I set up my workshop in an abandoned barn at the village edge, close to the wild boundaries of the forest where civilization melted into winter's domain. The building's weathered wooden walls held the patina of ages, smooth and silver as frost. I spent the first days reinforcing the structure, adding my own inventions: copper pipes that carried steam heat, brass valves that regulated temperature, delicate instruments that measured the mountain's moods. The villagers watched my work with curious respect, bringing gifts of thick blankets woven with patterns of snowflakes and stars, jars of preserved mountain berries that burst with summer's sweetness, and stories. Always stories, each one adding another layer to my understanding of their mysterious protector. By day, I worked on my inventions, new heating systems that didn't fight against the cold but worked in harmony with it, more efficient snow-clearing devices that moved with winter's natural rhythms. The crystal the elder had given me sat on my workbench, its warm pulse synchronizing with my heartbeat as I worked. By night, I listened to the villagers' tales of their mysterious protector. They spoke of blizzards calmed by her presence, of dying crops saved by her blessed frost, of children rescued from winter's grasp. In their stories, she was both terrible and tender, as changeable as the mountain weather, yet as constant as the eternal snows. Yet none had seen her as I had. None knew she could speak, or that she bore such weight in her immortal heart. None mentioned the profound loneliness I'd glimpsed in her glacier blue eyes. The second time I saw her, I was tracking an unusual energy reading deep in the forest. My instruments had detected something that defied scientific explanation. A cold that burned, a power that made the compass needle spin in impossible directions. The crystal in my pocket pulsed stronger with each step into the wilderness. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath. Snow fell in perfect silence, each flake drifting with deliberate grace. Ice coated the tree branches in layers that caught the fading light, creating a cathedral of frozen beauty. My breath fogged in the air, carrying the scent of pine and something sweeter, winter roses. She emerged from a curtain of falling snow, more substantial than before. Her presence brought that familiar mix of warmth and cold that I'd started to crave like a fever. Frost patterns spiraled out from her feet, creating trails of ice that matched the racing of my heart. I warned you to leave. Her voice carried notes of concern that belied her stern words. A snowflake landed on her cheek and didn't melt, adding to her crystalline beauty. I couldn't. The truth fell from my lips like fresh snow, pure and unstoppable. My fingers tightened around the crystal in my pocket, feeling its pulse quicken to match my own. Not without understanding. Understanding brings only pain, Ren. She spoke my name like a half-forgotten lullaby, each syllable carrying centuries of longing. The air between us grew thick with unspoken possibilities. Knowledge is not always a gift. Then let me share the burden of it. I stepped closer, watching the frost patterns shift and swirl around her feet in response to her emotions. You don't have to carry it alone. She studied me for a long moment, her eternal winter meeting my mortal warmth. The snow between us fell slower. Finally, she held out her hand. Frost immediately coated my glove where she touched it, but underneath, I felt a warmth that defied explanation. Come, she whispered, her voice carrying both invitation and warning. There is something you should see. She led me deeper into the forest, where the trees grew close and dark. Our footsteps left matching prints in the fresh snow, hers perfect crystals that sparkled with inner light, mine merely mortal impressions beside them. The crystal in my pocket grew warmer with each step, its pulse matching the rhythm of our movement. In a clearing stood an ancient shrine, its stone surfaces carved with scenes that caught and held the eye. Warriors battling a force of pure winter. A maiden stepping between humanity and protection. A sacrifice that echoed through centuries. At its center, a crystal much like mine pulsed with a cold blue light that seemed to reach for the snow maiden like a lover's touch. Long ago, she said, her voice taking on the cadence of ancient memory. These mountains faced a force that sought to plunge the world into endless winter. The people here had learned to live in harmony with the cold, but this entity, the Frost King, wanted only destruction. His power turned snow to steel, ice to obsidian, winter itself into a weapon. She touched the shrine's surface, and frost spread from her fingers, highlighting the carvings until they seemed to move. A young priestess discovered that the Frost King's power could be bound by an equal and opposite force, the warmth of human love and sacrifice. She offered herself, using her warmth and humanity as the price for his imprisonment. She became the first snow maiden, forever walking the boundary between human and spirit. You're her descendant? I asked, though in my heart I already knew the answer. I am her. She turned to me, and in her eyes I saw centuries of solitude. Immortality was part of the price. Each winter, I feel more of my humanity slip away as I maintain his bonds. Each summer, I remember less of what it meant to be human. Her hand still rested on the shrine, and I covered it with mine. The cold bit deep, but I welcomed it. There has to be another way. A balance between sacrifice and survival. Why would you risk yourself for me? Her voice held wonder and fear in equal measure. Snowflakes swirled between us, carrying the scent of winter roses and possibility. Because I see you, I said simply. Not the legend, not the spirit, but you. And no one should face eternity alone. Something shifted in her eyes then, a thaw in glaciers that had stood frozen for centuries. The crystal's pulse quickened, matching the rhythm of our shared breath. Your warmth calls to me, Ren. Like spring calls to winter, like dawn calls to dusk. But it also endangers you. Her free hand rose to cup my cheek, and frost bloomed across my skin like a caress. The colder I become, the more I hunger for mortal heat. Then take it. I turned my face into her touch, though every instinct warned against it. The cold burned, but beneath it lay a warmth I'd never known. Take what you need. It would destroy you. Fear crept into her voice. Not of me, but for me. I don't believe that. Another step closer. Frost crawled up my sleeves, but I didn't retreat. The crystal in my pocket blazed with warmth, counterpoint to her winter chill. You've spent centuries protecting others. Let someone protect you for once. The kiss, when it came, burned with cold fire. Frost spread across my skin, but beneath it, I felt her trembling with long-denied warmth. Her lips were soft as new snow, sweet as ice wine. For a moment, we stood suspended between mortal and immortal, winter and spring, duty and desire. The crystals, both hers and mine, pulsed in harmony, creating a symphony of light and power. Then the shrine's crystal flared with violent light, and she pushed me away. He feels it, she gasped. My weakness, my want. Ice spread from her feet, crackling across the clearing with predatory intent. Run. But I couldn't leave her. Not now. Not ever. Now, Ren! She shouted, as a force stronger than life and deadlier than death engulfed her in its frosty fury. Frightened and freezing, I obeyed her command. I ran, far and fast, questioning my decision to leave her, ashamed that I wasn't brave enough to stay. Weeks passed in a chilling blur, a dance of advance and retreat. By day, I worked frantically in my workshop, studying the old stories, combining ancient wisdom with modern science. Steam and ice, copper and crystal, human ingenuity and eternal magic. Surely there was a way to bridge these worlds. By night, she came to me, drawn by my warmth, even as she feared it would destroy us both. We shared moments stolen from winter itself, her cool fingers tracing my inventions with curiosity, my hands teaching her to feel again through layers of protective cloth. Each touch burned with cold, but each burn struck deeper into her frozen heart, awakening feelings she'd thought lost to centuries of ice. Tell me about the world beyond the mountains, she would ask, as we sat in my workshop, surrounded by the gentle hiss of steam and the ticking of delicate instruments. I described the wonders I'd seen, the machines I'd built, the dreams I still chased. In return, she shared fragments of her human life, memories preserved like flowers in ice, a mother's smile, a sister's laugh, the taste of fresh bread on winter mornings. But as our connection grew stronger, so did the Frost King's attacks. Storms raged with unnatural fury. Avalanches struck without warning. The very air grew sharp with malicious cold that sought to extinguish all warmth. He feeds on winter's power, she explained one night, as we huddled in my workshop while the wind howled outside. Her hands traced patterns in the frost on my windows, patterns that matched the designs scattered across my workbench. And I am winter-made flesh. The more I feel, the more power I release into the world, the more his prison weakens. Then we'll find another source of power. I showed her my latest invention, a device that could channel thermal energy, converting heat to cold and back again. Brass pipes twisted like frozen vines, copper coils hummed with contained power, and at its heart sat the crystal the Elder had given me, pulsing with possibility. If we can't break the cycle, we'll change it. She touched the device, leaving swirls of frost in her wake. You still think science can solve what magic created? I think love can solve what loneliness created. I caught her hand, ignoring the cold that instantly numbed my fingers. The crystal flared brighter at our touch. Your predecessor used sacrifice to bind him. But what if the answer isn't in losing humanity, but in sharing it? Understanding dawned in her winter-bright eyes. A balance. Yes. Not warm defeating cold, or cold consuming warm, but both existing together, strengthening one another. The storm outside intensified, as if the Frost King himself raged against our discovery. The windows rattled, ice crept across the walls. But in that moment, holding her gradually warming hand, I felt nothing but hope. It took us 3 more days to perfect the device. 3 days of endless storms. 3 days of the village huddling in fear while their protector and a foreign inventor gambled with forces beyond mortal understanding. The villagers brought us supplies without question, their trust in her extending to include me, the outsider who dared to love winter itself. When the final night came, we stood before the ancient shrine as the worst blizzard in living memory raged around us. The crystal prison pulsed with blinding light, ice spreading from its base like reaching fingers. Wind-driven snow carved patterns in the air, beautiful and deadly as the Frost King's power grew. "Are you sure about this?" Her voice barely carried over the wind. She looked more human than I'd ever seen her, fear and hope warring in her expression. "Once we begin, there's no turning back. If we fail, we won't." I activated the device, watching the indicators spin to life. Steam met ice in carefully controlled spirals. The crystal in my pocket pulsed in harmony with the shrine's larger one. "Do you trust me?" "More than I've trusted anyone in centuries." She took my hands, and for the first time, her touch didn't burn with cold. The ritual began simply, her power flowing into the crystal, my device channeling it, transforming it from destructive cold to balanced energy. But as the Frost King felt his prison changing, he fought back with all his ancient fury. Ice spears erupted from the ground. The wind turned solid, sharp enough to cut. The very air crystallized, threatening to freeze us where we stood. Through it all, she stood firm, one hand on the crystal, the other gripped in mine. Our hearts beat in time with the pulsing lights, creating a rhythm older than winter itself. "Hold on," I shouted, as the device reached critical levels. Steam and ice met in impossible patterns, neither winning, both transforming. Just a little longer. The cold became unbearable, then transcendent. I felt her power course through me, no longer burning but singing in my blood. My warmth flowed into her, not weakening but growing stronger in the sharing. Science and magic, mortal and spirit, love and duty, all merging into something entirely new. The crystal's light changed from cold blue to warm gold. The Frost King screamed in rage, then wonder, as his prison transformed. No longer a cage of sacrifice, but a lens of balance, focusing and dispersing winter's power in eternal harmony. The storm above calmed, snow falling now in gentle swirls that caught the dawn's first light. When it was over, she stood solid and real in my arms, her skin still cool but no longer deathly cold. "How do you feel?" I asked, brushing snowflakes from her hair, snowflakes that no longer froze instantly at her touch. "Human," she whispered, "but also more, both mortal and spirit, winter and spring." She touched my face, and her fingers left only the faintest trace of frost. "What about you?" I smiled, watching my breath mist in the air. A little cooler, but in a good way. The village celebrated for 3 days when they learned their protector had found both love and balance. The storms still come. Winter will always have its fury. But now they're natural, clean, part of the eternal cycle rather than an ancient being's rage. She has a mortal name now, though I keep it close to my heart. To the village, she's still their snow maiden, blessing their crops with gentle frost and calming winter's worst moods. To me, she's simply my love, cool fingers intertwined with mine as we walk the boundary between worlds. Our home sits at the edge of the village, half workshop and half shrine. The devices we create together combine science and magic in ways neither of us could have imagined alone. Steam and ice dance in eternal balance, just as we do. and on the coldest nights, when we watch the aurora dance above the peaks, I remember that some loves are worth braving the storm for. They say opposites attract, but maybe they do more than that. Maybe they complete one another, creating something entirely new in the space between extremes. In the end, that's where we found our answer, not in conquering the cold or surrendering to it, but in learning to dance with winter itself. And in our dance, we found forever. Starlight and Silver Shoes. The first time I saw him dance, I forgot how to breathe. Through the steam rising from the copper washing tub, his form cut through the morning mist like a dream, all fluid motion and quiet grace. It wasn't proper for the son of a duke to practice his dancing in the palace gardens where the servants worked, but Lucas had never cared much for being proper. I shouldn't have been watching. My hands were raw from scrubbing linens, and Madame Blackwood would have my head if she caught me idling. But at that moment, as Lucas spun beneath the ancient apple trees, I couldn't look away. Magic sparked in the air around him, though he couldn't see it. Little motes of golden light that danced in his wake, drawn to him just as I was. My name is Elena, though my stepfamily hasn't used it in years. To them, I'm girl, or you there, or most often, ash, because I'm forever covered in soot from tending the kitchen fires. 10 years ago, I was the cherished daughter of a wealthy merchant who married what he thought was a genteel widow. 3 months after he died of fever, I learned what genteel truly meant. But I had my small magics to comfort me. My mother, my real mother, had been a hedge witch of considerable talent. She died before she could teach me properly, but she left behind her grimoire and her gift running wild in my blood. I could charm mice to help me with my mending, convince the kitchen herbs to grow despite the frost, and when I danced alone in the garden at midnight, flowers bloomed beneath my feet. Lucas didn't know about any of that, of course. To him, I was just another servant he passed in the hallways when he came to his aunt's manor for tea. Lady Blackwood, my stepmother, was forever trying to match her daughters with him. I couldn't blame her. Besides being heir to a dukedom, Lucas had a smile that could melt frost and eyes like summer storms. But there was something more to him, something that called to the magic in my blood. I watched him dance in secret for months, learning the rhythm of his movements, and the way he spoke to himself as he practiced complex steps. Sometimes he would pause and look around as if sensing someone's gaze, and I would duck behind the laundry, my heart pounding. Once, I could have sworn he smiled directly at my hiding spot, but that had to be my imagination. Everything changed the night of the Starlight Ball. It was a grand masquerade held once every 7 years when the moon was full for 3 nights running. Every noble family in the kingdom attended, and the magic in the air was thick enough to taste. "You'll need to press all the gowns again," Madame Blackwood informed me that morning. "And mind you don't burn them this time." She didn't need to remind me of my punishment for that past transgression. The scars on my palms remembered well enough. What she didn't know was that I had burned the gown deliberately, after seeing the way she had struck Ruby for speaking out of turn. My magic had reacted instinctively, protecting the only way it could. I worked through the day without rest, preparing my stepsisters for the ball. Their dresses were masterpieces of silk and silver thread, their masks adorned with peacock feathers and moonstones. As I pinned up their hair, they chattered about Lucas. "He has to choose a bride soon," Daphne said, preening before the mirror. "Father says the old duke is insisting on it." "He'll choose me," Ruby declared, though there was a tremor in her voice. Of my 2 stepsisters, Ruby had always been kinder, trapped in her mother's web just as surely as I was. We danced together at the summer festival. I bit my cheek to keep from pointing out that Lucas had danced with everyone that night, including the elderly countess and her prize poodle. But I had seen the way his eyes glazed over during those dances, the way his smile never quite reached them. He moved with perfect precision, but no joy, like a clockwork figure going through the motions. When they finally departed in the family carriage, I allowed myself a moment of weakness. I went to my mother's trunk, the one thing of hers I'd managed to keep hidden, and pulled out her grimoire. The pages fell open to a familiar enchantment, one that could make old things new again, that could reveal the truth beneath any facade. I had never attempted anything so complex before. My small magics were one thing, but this was true witchcraft. Still, as I heard the distant music begin to drift from the palace, something in my heart shifted. The magic in my blood sang in harmony with the night's wild power, and I knew with sudden certainty that this was what my mother had been preparing me for all along. "Help me," I whispered to the mice who were my only friends. They had been watching me dance in secret for years, just as I watched Lucas. "Please." They scattered into the shadows, returning with bits of broken glass that sparkled like diamonds, scraps of silver thread, and flowers that bloomed by moonlight. I began to sing the spell, my voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each verse. The words felt ancient on my tongue, as though they had been waiting centuries to be spoken. The magic rose around me like starlight taking form. My ragged dress transformed into flowing silk the color of midnight, scattered with tiny lights that twinkled like the night sky. My mother's old mask became delicate silver filigree, and my work-worn boots turned to glass so fine it sang when I walked. But they weren't truly glass. They were crystallized starlight, harder than diamond and light as air. The last part of the spell was the most complex. As the magic settled over me, my appearance shifted subtly. Not enough to make me unrecognizable, but enough that no one would connect the glittering creature I'd become with the ash-covered servant girl they knew. It was a revelation of truth rather than a disguise, showing the person I might have been if grief and cruelty hadn't reshaped my life. The spell would last until the third moon set, the book warned. 3 nights of magic, and then everything would return to what it had been. But perhaps, whispered a voice that sounded like my mother's, that would be enough. I hadn't planned what I would do once I arrived at the ball. But as I entered the grand ballroom, Lucas turned as though drawn by an invisible thread. Our eyes met through our masks, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The magic in my blood leapt toward him like a compass needle finding true north. He crossed the room to me, bowing deeply. "I don't believe we've met," he said, though something in his voice held a question. His eyes, behind his mask of gold and obsidian, were wide with wonder. "No," I agreed, letting my normal speaking voice shift into something more melodious. "We haven't. But we have," I thought. "I know the way you count steps under your breath, the way you run your hand through your hair when frustrated, the way you dance alone in the morning mist. Would you honor me with a dance?" I placed my hand in his, and the orchestra began to play. We moved together as though we'd been practicing all our lives. Perhaps we had. All those mornings I'd watched him dance in the garden had taught me his rhythms, the way he liked to move. But this was different from his practiced court dances. This was pure joy, wild and free as the magic that swirled around us. "You dance beautifully," he murmured as we spun beneath the enchanted ceiling, where illusory stars wheeled overhead. "As though you've learned from watching the wind itself." "I had a good teacher," I replied without thinking. His steps faltered for just a moment. "Did you?" I quickly changed the subject, asking him about his family's lands. He spoke of his father's estates, but there was something troubled in his voice. "You don't sound eager to inherit," I observed. Lucas was quiet for several turns about the floor. "I love our lands," he said finally. "But I don't love what's expected of me. My father wants me to marry for political advantage, to rule exactly as he has ruled. Sometimes I feel like a character in a play, speaking lines written for someone else." He paused, then added softly, except when I dance, or when I'm with you." The honesty in his voice made my heart ache. "I know what that's like," I said softly. "To live a life others have chosen for you." He drew me closer, one hand warm against my waist, and we danced in silence for a while. When the song ended, he didn't let go of my hand. "Walk with me in the garden?" The night air was sweet with jasmine, and magic hung heavy as dew. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, books we'd read, places we dreamed of seeing, the way the stars looked on clear nights. He never asked my name or family connections, and I never offered them. Instead, we spoke of deeper things, hopes and fears, dreams and disappointments. With each word, the connection between us grew stronger. "There's something about you," he said at one point, his fingers brushing my cheek. "Something that feels like coming home." As moonset approached, I reluctantly pulled away. "I have to go." "Wait," he called after me. "Will you come tomorrow night?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." The second night, we danced until our feet should have ached, but the Starlight shoes kept me floating. When we needed rest, we escaped to the palace library where Lucas showed me his favorite volumes of poetry. He read aloud to me, his voice making the words come alive, and I taught him the old folk songs my mother used to sing. "There's something familiar about you," he said at one point, studying my face through my mask. "As though I've known you before. Sometimes when I practice my dancing in the morning, I feel someone watching, someone who understands." My heart stuttered. "Perhaps you have." He leaned closer, and for a moment I thought he might kiss me. But then a clock chimed somewhere in the palace, and I remembered who I was, who I really was. The third night, I almost didn't go. It would be easier, I told myself, to let the magic fade without having to say goodbye. But as I stood in my tiny attic room, looking at the grimoire, I knew I would regret it forever if I didn't take this last chance. Lucas was waiting by the garden entrance. Before I could speak, he took my hand and led me to a secluded corner of the grounds where a fountain played beneath the moon. The water sang with magic, and I realized with a start that it was responding to him. "I know who you are," he said quietly. My blood turned to ice. "What?" "Elena." He reached up and gently removed my mask. "I've watched you dance in the garden at midnight, when you thought no one could see. I've seen the way flowers bloom where you walk, even in winter." His smile was soft. "Did you think I wouldn't recognize your magic? It calls to mine." Tears spilled down my cheeks. "You have magic too?" "A little. Nothing like yours. Just enough to feel it in others, to know when something extraordinary is near." He brushed away my tears with his thumb. "I've been falling in love with you for months, watching you from windows and finding excuses to visit my aunt. The way you move, the way you care for others even when they hurt you, the strength that shines through no matter how they try to dim it. But I didn't know how to bridge the gap between us until you did it first." "I'm just a servant," I whispered, "and a witch. You're the only person who's ever seen me as myself, not just my title." He pressed his forehead to mine. "And I don't care if you're a witch or a washerwoman or a queen. I love you. Your magic calls to mine just as your heart calls to my heart." The clock began to strike midnight. I felt the magic beginning to unravel, my glamoured gown shifting back to rags. But Lucas held me tighter. "Stay," he whispered against my lips. "Stay with me." And when he kissed me, new magic bloomed between us, not my mother's spells or the ambient power of the Starlight ball, but something entirely our own. Where our feet touched the ground, starflowers sprouted and bloomed, their light reflecting off my crystallized Starlight shoes, which alone remained unchanged. The scandal rocked the kingdom, a duke's heir marrying a servant girl who practiced hedge magic. But Lucas's father, after meeting me and seeing how his son lit up in my presence, proved more understanding than anyone expected. "There's old magic in our bloodline too," he confided. "I always wondered when it would wake again." My step-family was less pleased, but with Lucas's support, I was finally able to claim my inheritance as my father's daughter. Madame Blackwood and her daughters found themselves having to work for a living for the first time in their lives, though I made sure Ruby was provided for. She lives in a cottage on our lands now, growing herbs and slowly learning to smile again. We were married in the garden where we had first watched each other dance. I still dance in the garden at midnight sometimes, but now Lucas dances with me. Our magic twines together, gold and silver, creating something more beautiful than either of us could manage alone. And everywhere our feet touch the earth, starflowers bloom, glowing with a light that never fades. The Promise. Candlelight danced across the marble floors of London's most prestigious ballroom, casting golden shadows that matched the shimmering champagne in crystal flutes. I stood at the edge of the crowd, my silk gown rustling softly with each breath, watching the swirl of couples moving to the gentle strains of a waltz. The air was thick with the scent of roses and orange blossoms, brought in by the cartload to decorate the Hartley's annual spring ball. Mother had outdone herself with my presentation this season. The pale blue silk of my gown caught the light perfectly, its silver embroidery glinting like frost on morning flowers. My dark curls were arranged in the latest fashion, with tiny diamond pins that sparkled like stars against the deep brown waves. At 18, I was considered the crown jewel of this year's debutantes, though the thought brought me little joy. I knew what it meant, an endless parade of suitors, each more concerned with my dowry than my heart. The season had already brought forth a dozen proposals, each more calculated than the last. Lord Pembroke with his aging estate and mountain of debt. The young Duke of Ashworth, barely 16 and pushed forward by his ambitious mother. Even my childhood friend Thomas had tried his hand, though we both knew there was no spark between us. "You look utterly bored, my lady." The voice carried the hint of a smile, rich and warm like honey. I turned to find myself staring into the most remarkable pair of green eyes I'd ever seen. Nicholas Owensby stood before me, the notorious charmer of London society. His dark hair fell in perfect waves, and his evening clothes were immaculate. A perfectly tailored black coat that emphasized his broad shoulders, a crisp white cravat, and a subtle gold pin that winked in the candlelight. But it was his smile that caught and held my attention. Crooked and genuine, nothing like the practiced simpers of other gentlemen. "I assure you, sir, I am perfectly entertained by my own thoughts," I replied, lifting my chin slightly. His reputation preceded him, a different lady on his arm at every ball, a trail of broken hearts in his wake. Just last week, I'd overheard Lady Winterbourne warning her daughter away from his dangerous charms. He laughed, the sound rich and unexpected. Lady Caroline Bentley, defending the excitement of standing alone in a corner. I must hear these fascinating thoughts of yours. The orchestra began a new piece, Mozart, one of my favorites, and he extended his hand. "Dance with me?" I hesitated, but something in his eyes made me place my gloved hand in his. As he led me onto the floor, I felt the eyes of the entire room upon us. The music began, and we moved together as if we'd danced 1,000 times before. His hand at my waist was steady and sure, his touch sending warmth spreading through my entire body. "Your thoughts, my lady," he prompted, guiding me through a turn with effortless grace. "I was thinking how tedious it is to be paraded about like a prize mare at auction," I admitted, surprising myself with my honesty. Each potential buyer examining my teeth and checking my pedigree. His eyes widened slightly, then crinkled at the corners. Refreshingly direct. And here I thought you were the perfect society miss. Perfect is rather dull, don't you think? The dance continued, but something had shifted. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, ranging from books to art to travel. He was surprisingly well-read, challenging my opinions on Byron with clever observations that made me laugh despite myself. When he spoke of his travels in Italy, his eyes lit up with genuine passion that made my heart flutter. "You should see Venice in the moonlight," he said, his voice dropping low. "The canals turn to ribbons of silver, and the whole city feels like a dream." "You make it sound magical," I whispered, lost in the picture he painted. "Everything can be magical if you look at it the right way." His hand tightened slightly on my waist, and I realized how close we'd drawn together, closer than propriety strictly allowed. When the music ended, I found I didn't want to let go of his hand. He seemed equally reluctant to release me, his fingers lingering against mine as he bowed. That night marked the beginning of what seemed like a dream. At every social gathering, Nicholas sought me out. We would find quiet corners to discuss everything and nothing, our conversations punctuated by lingering looks and brief touches that set my heart racing. He showed me a London I'd never known, secret gardens hidden between townhouses, tiny bookshops with treasures in their dusty corners, and quiet moments that belonged only to us. One afternoon, he took me to a hidden courtyard garden he'd discovered. Roses climbed the ancient walls, their pink and white blooms nodding in the gentle breeze. We sat on a stone bench, reading poetry together, his shoulder pressed warm against mine. "She walks in beauty, like the night," he quoted softly, but his eyes weren't on the book. They were on me, intense and full of something that made my breath catch. "Of cloudless climes and starry skies," I finished, my voice barely a whisper. His hand found mine, his thumb tracing circles on my palm through my thin glove. The touch sent shivers up my arm, and I knew I was falling deeply, irrevocably in love with him. I knew what people whispered behind their fans, that I was just another conquest for the notorious Mr. Owensby. But when he looked at me, I saw something different in his eyes, something real, something that made me believe in magic and true love and all the things I'd dismissed as girlish fantasies. Until the night of the Hartley's summer ball. I had arrived late, having spent too long choosing the perfect gown, deep emerald silk that made my eyes sparkle and my skin glow like moonlight. The ballroom was crowded, and I searched for Nicholas among the dancers. When I didn't see him, I made my way to the terrace for air. That's when I heard her laugh, musical and intimate, followed by his unmistakable voice. I turned the corner to find Nicholas pressed close to Lady Penelope Howard, his hand cupping her cheek as she gazed up at him adoringly. Her golden hair gleamed in the moonlight, and her beauty made my heart sink. "You know you're the only one who truly understands me," he murmured, and my world shattered. I fled before either could see me, but the image was burned into my mind. How foolish I'd been to think I was different, special. I was just another in his long line of conquests, another notch in his belt of broken hearts. The next morning, I convinced my parents to let me retire to our country estate in Derbyshire. I claimed the London air disagreed with me, that I needed rest. In truth, I needed to escape the whispers, the pitying looks, and most of all, the chance of seeing Nicholas again. The countryside welcomed me with open arms. Spring was in full bloom, painting the rolling hills in vibrant greens and soft purples. I threw myself into managing the estate, learning everything I could from our steward. The physical work in the gardens helped ease the ache in my heart, and slowly, I began to feel like myself again. I spent my days in the rose garden my mother had planted years ago, pruning and tending the delicate blooms. Something was healing in nurturing beauty, in watching life unfold according to its own gentle rhythm. The roses didn't care about society's expectations or broken hearts. They simply grew, bloomed, and shared their beauty with the world. But peace was not to be mine for long. One misty morning, as I walked through the rose garden, I heard hoofbeats on the gravel drive. My heart stopped when I saw Nicholas dismounting, looking travel-worn but determined. His clothes were dusty from the road, his cravat slightly askew, so different from his usual immaculate appearance. He carried something small in his hand that caught the early morning light. "Caroline," he called out, his voice carrying across the garden. "Please, let me explain." I turned to leave, but his next words froze me in place. "What you saw that night, it wasn't what you think." Lady Penelope was distraught over her brother's illness. I was comforting an old friend, nothing more. I've been a fool in many ways, but never about my feelings for you. I faced him slowly, steeling myself against the sight of him. But what I saw made me pause. Gone was the polished dandy of London society. This Nicholas looked raw and vulnerable, his eyes shadowed with lack of sleep. There was an earnestness in his expression I'd never seen before. "Why are you here?" I asked, proud that my voice remained steady. He opened his hand, revealing an ancient ring. The gold was worn smooth with age, set with a stone that seemed to hold starlight within its depths. As the morning light touched it, colors swirled in its heart like the northern lights I'd read about in books. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said softly. "There's a story in my family about it, that it was blessed by a wise woman centuries ago, enchanted to reveal true love. It shows the bearer's heart's desire, but only if that love is pure and unselfish." As he spoke, the stone began to glow with a soft, warm light. Inside its depths, I saw images forming. Nicholas and me in the bookshop, laughing over Byron. The two of us walking in the secret garden, his jacket around my shoulders against the evening chill. Every genuine moment we'd shared. But I also saw moments I hadn't witnessed. Nicholas pacing his study late at night, writing and discarding letter after letter to me. Him questioning his past choices, realizing how empty his life had been before we met. "I've changed, Caroline," he continued, taking a step closer. His familiar scent, sandalwood and leather, wrapped around me, bringing back a flood of memories. "The man I was before, the one who flirted and played at love, he died the moment I met you. You showed me what real connection means, what it is to truly see someone and be seen in return." The ring pulsed brighter, and I felt a warmth spread through me, like sunshine after rain. Magic tingled in the air around us, ancient and powerful. The roses seemed to lean closer, their perfume intensifying as if nature itself held its breath to witness this moment. "I don't expect you to forgive me immediately," Nicholas continued, reaching for my hand but stopping just short of touching me. "But I'm asking for a chance to prove myself, to show you the man I've become, the man you helped me become." The morning mist swirled around us, touched with golden light. In that moment, I felt something shift in the air, as if fate itself held its breath. The magic of the ring seemed to hum, a melody that matched the beating of my heart. "How do I know this isn't just another pretty speech?" I whispered, even as something deep within me recognized the truth in his words. He held out the ring. "See for yourself." With trembling fingers, I took it. The moment it touched my skin, the world around us changed. The garden blurred, and I saw visions in the stone. Nicholas spending weeks researching his family history to find the ring. His sleepless nights after I left London. The truth of that evening with Lady Penelope. I saw him comforting her as she wept over her brother's worsening condition. Saw how he thought of me even in that moment, wishing he could share his own experiences of losing a sibling young. But more than that, I saw his heart, laid bare before me. The love there was real, profound, and transformative. I saw how meeting me had awakened something in him he'd never known was sleeping. A desire for depth, for meaning, for a love that could last beyond a single dance or stolen kiss. The visions faded, leaving us standing in the misty garden, changed by what we'd seen. Nicholas reached for my hand again, and this time I let him take it. His touch was gentle and reverent, as if he held something infinitely precious. "I love you, Caroline Bentley," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not for your beauty or your status, but for your brilliant mind, your kind heart, and the way you challenge me to be better. I love you for the person you are when no one else is watching. The woman who reads Byron in the garden and dreams of more than society's expectations." Tears blurred my vision as I looked up at him. The morning sun broke through the mist, surrounding us in a golden glow. The ring warmed in my palm, its magic pulsing like a heartbeat. "I love you too," I whispered, the words carrying the weight of truth. "The real you, not the mask you wore in London." He pulled me close, one hand cupping my face as the other wrapped around my waist. When our lips met, the ring's magic surged around us. Golden light spiraled upward, surrounding us in a shower of sparks that felt like falling stars. The roses burst into sudden bloom, their petals opening to release waves of heavenly fragrance. At that moment, I understood what the old legend meant. True love wasn't just about passion or romance, but about seeing and accepting someone completely, flaws and all. Nicholas slipped the ring onto my finger, where it fit perfectly as if it had been waiting for this moment throughout the centuries. The stone settled into a gentle glow, a constant reminder of the magic that had brought us together, and the love that would keep us that way. "Tell me more about Venice," I said softly, leaning into his embrace. His smile was radiant as he held me close. "I'll do better than that. I'll take you there. We'll watch the moonlight on the canals together, and I'll show you all the magic I promised." As we walked through the garden together, planning our future, I realized that sometimes the greatest magic isn't in enchanted rings or ancient legends, but in the simple courage it takes to open your heart and trust again. Nicholas had proven that love, when real and true, has the power to transform not just the heart, but the very soul. And so began our new chapter, written not in the glittering ballrooms of London, but in the quiet moments we shared, in the gentle magic of everyday love, and in the promise of a future filled with all the adventures we would face together. The ring on my finger glowed softly, a reminder that some promises, once made with a pure heart, become the most powerful magic of all. In the years that followed, we often returned to that rose garden where we found our way back to one another. Each visit, the roses seemed to bloom a little brighter, their perfume a little sweeter, as if blessed by the magic of that morning. And though we traveled the world together, seeing all the wonders Nicholas had promised, we always knew that the greatest magic was the love we shared. A love that, like the enchanted ring, would shine brighter with each passing year. Moonlight's daughter. I was born during the winter solstice, when moonlight painted the snow silver, and magic ran thick through the night air. My mother named me Luna before she died, her last breath frosting in the cold air as she pressed her silver pendant into my tiny hand. "Keep it close," she whispered. "It will protect you when I cannot." The pendant thrummed with her fading heartbeat, absorbing her final spell, a mother's desperate attempt to shield her child from what she had foreseen. My father, the king, was never the same after her death. He wandered the castle like a ghost, touching the frost patterns she had once woven into the windows, staring at the aurora she had danced with on clear nights. The servants whispered that she had been the last of the true winter witches, that her death had broken something vital in the kingdom's magic. I grew up wild and free in the northern castle, where my mother's magic still lingered in every stone. The servants taught me what they could remember of her ways, how to speak to animals, to coax plants from frozen soil, to sing songs that made the northern lights ripple and dance. My father would watch me sometimes, tears freezing on his cheeks, as I made snowflakes dance in elaborate patterns just as she once had. But everything changed when Regina arrived. I was 12 when she swept into our court in a swirl of crimson silk, bringing summer's heat to our winter castle. She was beautiful in a sharp way, all angles and red lips and eyes that burned like fever dreams. Where she walked, the ancient frost patterns melted from the windows. Where she touched, the stones grew warm. My father seemed enchanted by her, but I saw what others didn't, how the plants withered when she passed, how animals fled from her shadow, how her reflection sometimes moved independently of her body. Most disturbing of all was her obsidian mirror, a massive black glass that pulsed with an unholy light and seemed to whisper in the dark. I didn't realize she was a blood witch until it was too late. The signs were there, the servants disappearing one by one, the strange red stains that appeared and vanished in the snow, the way my father grew weaker as she grew stronger. But I was young, and grief had made me blind to everything except my own pain. I was 18 when my father died, poisoned by degrees with magic that left no trace. That same night, unable to sleep, I wandered the castle corridors and heard Regina speaking to her mirror. "The girl must die," the mirror whispered in a voice like blood dripping on ice. "Her power grows stronger each day. Soon she will be more powerful than you. Already she unknowingly unravels your spells with her mere presence. The winter magic in her blood calls to the land, threatening everything we have worked for." "Send your huntsman," Regina commanded. "Bring me her heart. With it, I can complete the ritual and claim this kingdom's magic for my own." I fled into the night with only my mother's pendant and the clothes on my back. The huntsman caught up with me at the edge of the dark forest, his bow drawn. But when our eyes met, something extraordinary happened. The pendant at my throat flared with silver light, and his eyes cleared as if waking from a dream. "Run," he growled, lowering his weapon. His eyes were a striking amber that reminded me of sunlight through autumn leaves. Something passed between us, a recognition that shook me to my core. "Run far and deep into the forest, never return." He pressed a small knife into my hand, his touch sending sparks of electricity through my skin. "I'll buy you time, but she'll know soon enough that I've betrayed her." I ran until my legs gave out, the frozen branches of the dark forest tearing at my clothes and hair. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I stumbled into a clearing bathed in ethereal blue light. 7 standing stones rose from the snow, each one carved with runes that glowed with inner fire. They were arranged in a perfect circle, and in the center grew a single white rose blooming impossibly in the snow. As I approached, the stones hummed with power. Forms emerged from them, not humans, but not quite spirits either. They were the guardians of the north, ancient beings of ice and starlight who protected the wild magic of the forest. They appeared as tall, luminous figures with features that shifted like aurora lights. "Daughter of the moon," they greeted me. "We have waited long for you. Your mother spoke of your coming." My mother? The word caught in my throat. "She was one of us once," said a guardian, whose form rippled with shades of violet and gold. "Before she chose to take human form, to love a human king, she knew her child would bridge both worlds." The guardians took me in, teaching me to harness the wild magic in my blood. Under their guidance, I learned to bend moonlight into shields, to speak with the winter winds, to walk in dreams. I learned that my mother had been a guardian who fell in love with my father when he was a young prince. who chose mortality to be with him. The pendant she had given me was a piece of her original form, crystallized starlight that held the essence of her power. Time moved strangely in their realm. Days might have been years or minutes. The guardians taught me that all magic had a price, that power freely given was stronger than power taken by force. Regina's blood magic was an abomination, they said, a perversion of the natural order. I thought often of the huntsman who had saved me, wondering if Regina had punished him for his betrayal. Sometimes in my dreams, I saw his amber eyes, felt the electric touch of his hand on mine. The guardians exchanged knowing looks when I woke from these dreams with frost flowers blooming around my bed. But even as I grew stronger, I felt Regina's dark magic spreading through the kingdom like poison. The mirror's power grew with each life she took, each heart she fed it. The forest itself began to sicken, the trees bleeding red sap, the animals born twisted and wrong. The guardian's power waned as the corruption spread. And then he returned, the huntsman who had spared my life. He stumbled into the clearing one night, badly wounded by Regina's shadow wolves. His clothes were torn and bloody, but his eyes blazed with the same inner fire I remembered. "Luna," he gasped as he collapsed. The sound of my name on his lips made my heart stutter. I caught him before he hit the ground, cradling his head in my lap as I called on the frost to numb his wounds. "She sent me to find you again," he managed between pained breaths as I helped him to the healing stone. "But I came to warn you instead. She knows where you are. The mirror. It sees everything. But her blood magic doesn't work on me anymore. Not since..." He reached up, his fingers brushing the pendant at my throat. "Not since you woke me up." His name was Ash, he told me as I tended his wounds. Regina had bound him to her service years ago, using blood magic to turn him into her perfect hunter. He had killed for her, and collected hearts for her dark rituals, until the moment my mother's pendant broke through her spell. "Your eyes," he murmured one night as we sat beneath the aurora, his head resting in my lap as I combed my fingers through his dark hair. "They remind me of the northern lights, when I saw them that night when your pendant glowed. I remembered who I was. It was like waking up from a nightmare into the most beautiful dream. I should have been frightened to have a hunter so close, but something about Ash called to the wild magic in my blood. As he healed, we grew closer. He taught me to track and hunt, while I showed him the secret paths of the forest. When he smiled, a rare and beautiful thing, my heart danced like moonlight on snow. The first time we kissed was during a winter storm. We had taken shelter in a cave, and I was trying to start a fire with frozen fingers. Ash caught my hands in his, bringing them to his lips to warm them. The simple touch sent shivers through me that had nothing to do with the cold. "You've awakened something in me," he whispered against my skin. "Something I thought died long ago. When I'm with you, I feel whole, real, like the person I was always meant to be." When his lips met mine, magic sparked between us like the aurora painting the sky. The cave filled with soft blue light, and frost flowers bloomed on the walls in intricate patterns. His hands tangled in my hair as he pulled me closer, and I felt our hearts beating in perfect synchronization. Where our skin touched, little flares of magic danced like fireflies. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you broke Regina's spell," he confessed against my lips. "Every dream, every thought, has led me back to you." But our peace couldn't last. Regina's power grew stronger with each passing day, and the forest was dying. The guardians grew restless, their forms flickering like candles in the wind. The white rose in the center of their circle began to wilt. "The mirror must be destroyed," they told me. "It is the source of her power, a portal through which she draws dark magic from the void between worlds. But only one of pure heart and wild magic can shatter it. one who carries both human love and guardian power in their blood. "I'll go with you," Ash said, when I told him I had to return to the castle. He pulled me close, his warmth chasing away the eternal winter chill. "You're not facing her alone." I shook my head, though it pained me. "Her blood magic still has some hold on you. If you come too close." "I don't care." His hands framed my face, his amber eyes fierce with love and determination. "I lost you once. I won't lose you again. Whatever power she still has over me, my love for you is stronger. I choose you, Luna. I will always choose you." The guardians gave us their blessing and their gifts. A bow carved from ancient ice for Ash, its arrows tipped with crystallized moonlight, and for me, a crystal vial of pure starlight. "When all seems darkest," they said, "remember that love is the oldest and strongest magic of all." We returned to the castle under the cover of the longest night of the year, when Regina's power would be weakest. The journey was treacherous. Shadow wolves prowled the borders of her influence, and dark magic had twisted the familiar landscape into something nightmarish. But we had one another, and where our hands clasped, magic flowed between us like a river of light. Regina was waiting for us in the throne room. The obsidian mirror loomed behind her, its surface writhing with trapped souls. She had grown more beautiful and more terrible. Her skin was pure white, her lips blood red, her eyes burning with unholy fire. "Foolish girl," she laughed when we burst in. "Did you think I wouldn't feel you coming? Your mother couldn't stop me. What makes you think you can?" She gestured, and Ash collapsed, clutching his chest where her blood magic still bound him. "Kill her," she commanded him. "Kill your love and bring me her heart." Ash fought against her control, his body shaking with effort. "Luna," he gasped. "Run!" Instead, I ran to him, pressing my mother's pendant into his hand. The silver flared with moonlight, brighter than ever before, burning away the last traces of Regina's hold on him. He rose with a roar of defiance, firing arrow after arrow at the shadow wolves while I faced my stepmother. Regina's beauty melted away, revealing her true form, a creature of blood and shadow, with void black eyes and claws that dripped darkness. The mirror pulsed behind her, hungry for more power, more hearts. "Your mother died trying to protect you," Regina snarled, "just as this huntsman will die. Love is a weakness, girl. It always has been." But as she reached for me with claws of shadow, I uncorked the vial of starlight. It exploded outward in a wave of pure radiance, burning away her darkness. I sang the songs the guardians had taught me, weaving moonlight into chains that bound her. Ash's arrows flew true, pinning her shadows to the wall with spears of frozen light. "The mirror," he shouted. "Destroy it now." I pressed my hand to the obsidian surface, letting all my power flow through me. My mother's gift, the guardian's teachings, and most importantly, the pure, wild magic of love that bloomed between Ash and me. Cracks spread across the mirror's surface, leaking shadow. Regina screamed as her source of power shattered. Both she and the mirror exploded into 1,000 glittering shards, leaving nothing behind but a fading echo of her final cry. The trapped souls flew free, their light purifying the castle as they ascended. The castle stirred, as if waking from a long nightmare. Color returned to the walls, and the eternal winter that had gripped the kingdom began to ease. But I had used too much power. I felt myself falling, the world going dark around me. "Luna." Ash caught me as I collapsed, cradling me against his chest. "Stay with me, my love. Stay with me. I didn't fight my way back to you to lose you now." His lips found mine, warm and desperate, and I felt his life force flowing into me, freely given. The wild magic in my blood rose to meet it, weaving us together in ways that could never be undone. Where our tears fell, roses bloomed, white as snow with hearts of gold. When I opened my eyes, the guardians stood around us, more solid than I had ever seen them. "The balance is restored," they said. "Light and dark, winter and summer, wild magic and human heart. You have done what your mother dreamed of, bridged the gap between our worlds with love. We rebuilt the kingdom together, Ash and I. The people called me the Moon Queen, and him, the Hunter King. Magic returned to the land, not the dark power of blood and mirrors, but the wild magic of the forest, of moonlight and starlight and love freely given. The guardians' power flowed freely again, and the white rose in their circle bloomed eternally. On winter nights, we still visit the clearing where I first learned to harness my power. Sometimes we dance under the aurora, and flowers of frost and flame bloom where our feet touch the earth. Ash holds me close, his heart beating in time with mine, and I know that this is what my mother chose mortality for, this perfect, wild, human love. Now when I look in mirrors, I see only truth. A woman with eyes like the northern lights, a man with a heart as wild as the forest, and between us, a love strong enough to break any curse. For true love, freely given, is the most powerful magic of all.